Keep it short and sweet.
14 minutes. No, sir. Our guests. In charge of the Heavy Brigade at the Battle of Balaklava on the 25th of October, 1854. The Allied Army, made up of French, British and Turkish forces, commanded by Field Marshal the Lord Raglan. The British Cavalry Division was commanded by Lord Lucan. The Light Brigade, Lord Cardigan, his brother-in-law. The Heavy Brigade, commanded by one of our very own, Major General Sir James York Scarlett. Scarlett was a huge figure of a man, very popular with the troops. In fact, he had spent over 20 years with the 5th Dragoon Guards. He was a Dragoon through and through. He was a major with them, then on promotion to commanding officer. He remained in command for over 14 years. And then on promotion to Major General, he took over the Heavy Brigade, which consisted of first the Royal Dragoons, the 2nd Dragoons, the Scots Greys, the 4th Royal Irish Dragoons, the 5th Dragoon Guards, Princess Charlotte of Wales's, and the 6th Inniskilling Dragoons. The Allied Army numbered about 64,500 at that point in the Crimean War. They were up against the vast numbers of the Russian army, commanded by the Crown Prince Alexander Menshikov, and he had taken his Russian army into the interior of the Crimea to regroup and prepare to counterattack the Allies in the area of Balaklava, and wait for the arrival of 2 further Russian divisions coming from the Ukraine, taking their numbers to about 120,000. The port of Balaklava was taken from the Russians the month before on the 26th of September. The Allies required a deep water port in the Black Sea to facilitate the huge number of resupply ships coming from homelands of England, France and Carrickfergus, with munitions, fresh rations, fresh water, medical support equipment. The harbour sat at the base of a huge, steep, mountainous region, the Chersonese uplands. Access to the port was very difficult. It was via a gorge which ran from the port north for about 1.25 miles, where it opened up into the South Valley. The South Valley was a basin-shaped valley about 4 miles wide and 1.5 miles deep. And at the far edge of that South Valley was a huge ridge line, the Causeway Heights. The right flank, more mountains. The left flank was a huge hill area with hugely overgrown vineyards. Just to the left of the gorge, when you come up to the gorge there, just to the left-hand side, there was a small civilian settlement, Carrickfergus. And right smack bang in the middle of that South Valley was a small ridge line. It ran horizontal to the Causeway Heights, and it was about 1 mile in length. Now, the responsibility for the defence of Balaklava was given to Sir Colin Campbell, the commander of the 93rd Highland Brigade, the Highlanders. And he went about laying out his defences as follows. On them Causeway Heights, he ordered the construction of 6 redoubts, numbered from 1 to 6, running from east to west along that ridge line, about 800 yards apart. And in those he positioned the Turkish forces, along with their own artillery. The right flank responsibility was given to the French, and the left flank, and in particular the far northwest corner, that responsibility was given to the British Cavalry Division. And he positioned his Light Brigade just the other side of the overgrown vineyards. Then further round to their left and forward of their location, he positioned the Heavy Brigade. In the area of Carrickfergus, headquartered 2 British infantry divisions led by the Grenadier and Coldstream Guards. The foot soldiers occupied the Chersonese uplands. Just to the right of the gorge, on the opposite side from the Carrickfergus, he positioned the remainder of his Royal Marines, 2,000 Royal Marines, along with their own artillery. Now, on that small ridge, which now becomes a critical position, he positioned his own Highland Brigade, the 93rd Highlanders, along with a battalion of Turkish infantry and assets from the Royal Horse Artillery. Defences set. Raglan and Sir Colin expected the weather to improve, but it got worse. The temperatures dropped to -30 of the night. Fire pickets had to be doubled. Movement between locations during daylight hours became very difficult due to the weather. The boats coming from homeland ground to a halt. The fresh rations ran out. The drinking water became contaminated. Disease was rife, especially amongst the French. Morale was not great. And to make things worse, there was intelligence reports coming from the north that the Russians were massing and preparing to attack Balaklava. Raglan surprisingly dismissed these reports. The night of the 24th of October, a turn for the worse. There was a massive Russian artillery bombardment on the Causeway Heights. By dawn, all 6 redoubts had been captured by the Russians, including the Turkish artillery. The Russian forces were now in full retreat back towards Balaklava and Kadikoye. The Russians, now seizing the upper hand, turned up captured artillery onto the small ridge and began to range in. At that point, Sir Colin Campbell gave the first of 2 historic orders. He orders the Highlanders off the ridge onto the reverse slope, form 2 ranks and fix bayonets. The Turkish infantry battalion fled the position straight away, heading back towards Balaklava and Kadikoye. The Russians, now thinking that they had vacated the ridge, ordered a hasty cavalry charge on the ridge from the area between Redoubt 3 and 4, head on. The Russian cavalry charge went very well, right up until the point where they set foot on the ridge, and Sir Colin gave the second order. Says he, "Men, there is no retreat from here. Return the colours!" And he ordered that brigade back up the ridge to the top. And when they got there, they fired sustained volley shot into the heart of the cavalry charge from the Russians. It broke the charge and turned it at the last safe moment. The Russian cavalry fallen dead at the feet of the Highlanders. And still to this day, Highlanders wear scarlet ribbons in their socks, representing Russian cavalry blood splatter at the Battle of Balaklava. And they actually became later known as the Thin Red Line. Raglan appeared on the battlefield at about 7:30 on the eastern of Scotland. Observing what was going on, he orders the 2 infantry divisions from Kadikoye to move north in support of the Highlanders and reinforce the ridge. He orders cavalry to move south to support the cavalry, to support the infantry. The order falls immediately to Sir James and the Heavy Brigade, and they were ready to move in 2 columns. The front column led by Sir James, his ADC Lieutenant Elliot and Trumpet Major Monks. The lead squadron in the front column was 1 squadron of the Inniskillings, followed by 2 squadrons of Scots Greys. There was then a gap. And the second column, led by 2 squadrons of the Inniskillings, followed by the 5th Dragoon Guards, Princess Charlotte of Wales's, and bringing up the rear was the 4th Royal Irish Dragoons. The Royal Dragoons were ordered to remain in place as reserve with the remainder of the brigade. They first of all passed through the Light Brigade's position. They were sorting themselves out from the night before. Passing through the overgrown vineyards, as they cleared the overgrown vineyards, Scarlett and Elliot noticed over their left shoulder the remainder of the Russian cavalry moving in the direction of the Highlanders. Some 3,500 to 4,000 man on horse in battle formation. And Scarlett knew in that moment that he had to put himself and the Heavy Brigade between the Russians and the Highlanders. He immediately ordered the front column, 300 of them. He ordered them to left wheel into line and ordered Monks to blow the trot gallop charge. And up the hill they charged, the gallant 300 of the Heavy Brigade into the masses of the Russian cavalry, hitting them with such force of violence that they caused the Russian formation to falter in surprise and shock. First to the Russians was Scarlett, followed in seconds by the Inniskillings and the Scots Greys. By this time, the second column had cleared the overgrown vineyard. Two squadrons of the Inniskillings formed up immediately and charged the front left flank of the Russians as it was folding in behind the Scots Greys. The 5th Dragoons, they moved round to the left flank and charged them head on from the 9 o'clock position. The 4th Royal Irish, working of their mark, they moved round to the right flank and charged the Russians from the 3 o'clock position head on into the right flank. So decisive was the charges of the 4th and 5th that it virtually broke the Russian formation in two and brought it to a complete standstill. This was now a static enemy with a command structure in complete chaos. The 1st Royal Dragoons, realising what was going on their own initiative, the commanding officer orders the regiment round to join the charge, and when he got there, they charged from the rear right flank, cutting off their withdrawal route. The fighting was brutal and bloody. Now these are the words of a Corporal Gough of the Inniskillings who took part in the charge. And this is what he said. When we charged, my horse fell. He tried to get up and gallop on, but he fell again. I was entangled in the bridle and the saddle with my left leg and head hanging towards the ground. I managed to cut myself loose and stand up, whereupon a Russian appeared. Thank God McNamara was there and nearly cleaved his head from his body. I grabbed the rider of his horse, whereupon another Russian appeared with his sword outstretched. I see a pistol in the holster pipe, and I shot him in the arm. He dropped his sword, and I immediately ran him through the body. But poor Captain Neville had fallen from his horse dreadfully hurt. I could see him lying there with his face to the ground, with 3 wounds to his back. A Russian dismounted and cut him savagely across the head with his sword. Thank God his helmet saved his scalp, but his right ear was cut through. More cavalry galloped over poor Captain Neville, and he lay there perfectly still. Me and Abbott dismounted and managed to raise him by bodily strength and moved him to a place of safety. End quote. The melee continued at the closest possible quarters. Dead, dying Russians strewn across a blood-soaked battlefield. Riderless horses bolting left, right and centre. At that point again, Scarlett knew he had the beating of them. The victory was to the Heavy Brigade. And he pursued and pressed that charge for a further 300 yards before he called a halt. And at that point the Royal Horse Artillery opened up on them, cutting them down further. The Russian cavalry never really recovered from that charge of the Heavy Brigade for the remainder of the Crimea. The charge of the Heavy Brigade at Balaklava went down in history, immortalising our ascending regiments of the 4th Royal Irish Dragoons, the 5th Dragoon Guards, Princess Charlotte of Wales, and the 6th Inniskilling Dragoons. Their ethos, their discipline, courage, and sheer will to fight the face of the enemy is deeply embedded in our regimental history and traditions. And every year since 1854, we have remembered our fallen comrades at Balaklava, and this year is no different. Thanks to Jane and our Skins Association here in Northern Ireland, long may it continue. Listen, it's going to just take me a couple more seconds, but this is not, you will not find this in many history books, but it is known in the regiment to this day. Towards the end of the Crimean War, Scarlett was promoted Lieutenant General. But the 5th Dragoon Guards lost their commanding officer due to war injury. And he personally took them back under command again as their commanding officer. And he retained them under command until such times as an appropriate commanding officer could be found. Qui severavit, vesta dona resterem.